Welcome. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about forms that write information to a database and then want to pull that information back out in a form. And this is a really common operation that you'll see with more advanced data workflows. We're not just capturing data from your users, but you're actually capturing data from employees or workers, or effectively people in your system who you expect will need to have updates later on. So RackForms, we sort of have a one-click way of doing this, and that's what we want to talk about in this video, though as with all things RackForms, there are multiple ways of accomplishing this task, and the sort of most obvious one would be that you just kind of create everything that you're about to see in the automated way. You just create that by hand, which is certainly possible. And there's more advanced workflows, which we might talk about at the end of this video. But for now, let's talk about the simple version. So I have a form, and this is going to be a very simple form that just has, in this case, 3 fields. So you notice I'm just going to have 3 text fields. Actually, let's make one of these a select field, just to make it a little bit more visually interesting. And we have a submit button, and then I'll add a submission page to my form. So this would be a very standard, I'm capturing data from my users, and I'm going to push it into a database. And the form that I'm going to be creating here then, I do want this to match with the database table that I'm going to be targeting. So when you install RackForms, you will get a table called FB_demo installed by default. And the point of this table is just to provide a sort of simple table that has very common data types in it. So numbers, bit fields, blob fields for images, timestamps, date time fields, etc. And this table, which you'll see in many of these videos, is just a really nice way of kind of quickly sending data into somewhere that's representative of what a real table would look like. In other words, there's lots of fields and they have different data types. So in this case then, what I want to do is I want to be able to pull out the name, the age, and the email of the user that I've presumably already entered a record. So here I am Macrodenic, I'm record number 302, and I have some information. So how would I pull this information into this form right here? Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to name my fields to what the fields in the form would be. So name, age, and email, or the fields in the database would be. So name, age, and email. And then I want to go through and I want to make sure that these field names actually match my database column names. So column names are case sensitive. So here you'll notice we have lowercase n, lowercase a for age, and lowercase e. I'm just going to change this then to lowercase name and so on. So at this point now, I could actually make this form write to the database. So I could do that by selecting my form page, right-clicking, and under SQL Plus Automator, selecting the database type I have, in this case MySQL. I'd fill in the table name, so FB demo, it's the name of this table. And you'll notice that I have these 3 fields, name, age, and email, and I'll just tell RackForms to add the item that writes to the database, which we call the SQL Plus insert item. So I'll click that, and you can see now that I'm inserting the FB demo. I'm targeting these 3 fields, name, age, and email, and if I run this form, we'll put in new value, age of 99, just as really obvious to see. And then the email, it's blank right now because I didn't actually put any values in the select statement. So we'll just submit this through. And if I refresh my database, there it is, new value, age 99, and blank email. So we want to update this now. To do that, what I'll do is I'll actually delete the item that wrote to my database when the assumption was this is a brand new record. So in this sort of form right here, insert into FB demo, this is assuming the record already exists. Well, what we want to do is we want to actually update the database based on some record that we've pulled out. And this is where things get a little bit interesting, because here we're actually talking more about application logic than form logic. And by that, I just mean to say that there has to be some sort of logic built into this form now that allows us to actually select a record that we want to update. And so the update statement that we're about to add is not just going to add a new record to my database, it's going to grab an existing record and then present the values that I previously filled out as values that I can then update the database with. So the way we do that, again, is very simple here, is I right-click, same as I did before, I'm going to go to the MySQL data type in the SQL Plus Automator. Notice also that we do have SQL Server and Postgres. But I'm going to name the same table I had before, so FB demo, but this time I'm going to select populate all pages. And what this is going to do is quite a bit more than what the first item that we saw did, which is that it adds a block of code to the top of my form. It adds an SQL Automator query item to effectively query from the database so it can pre-populate my form fields. And then it's created a submission page, SQL plus Automator item, which in this case, again, is a SQL plus. So this is updating the database now. Those of you who've written SQL before will instantly recognize this as being different from the first version of this form where I was just inserting. Now I'm updating. And then finally, we have another block of code, which is it's removing a piece of information that keeps our state of the page. And so this form now, if I run this without providing a query string, is going to look very similar to the previous version of my form. So notice it's just a bunch of empty fields. But watch this. If I put in ID equals, and I put in the ID of this record I just added, so 376, now it's actually pre-populating those values. So new value of 99. So what happens if I change this to a more realistic age? So let's say 21 and submit it. We go to our submission page, same as before, but now we've actually updated the database. We haven't written a new record, we've just updated it. So that's very interesting. So in other words, what's happening now is a database operation, but it's an update operation. And that's pretty much it. That's how you create a form that updates the database as opposed to inserts a database item. Again, there's a lot going on here. When I said before that you do this manually, by manually you would, for example, write the code that sets up the form. You would write the items that populate the database fields using these default values. You can do all that. But the Automator populate all pages just does all that for us. Now, the last thing about this, though, is the thing you're probably wondering, well, how does this doesn't really help our users, for our users to have to sort of like type in a query string value. Like that's not great. So how do we actually work this into a larger flow? Well, this is why I said before that this is more like an application now. Because instead of just form pages really collecting information and sending it somewhere, we need to have form pages displaying information to our users so that the users can then select maybe a record and then get to this form. So let me show you, there's many ways of doing this. Let me show you the one way that's native to RackForms that's usually the best possible way, which is using a builder page. So I'm going to add a builder page, I'm going to put it at the top of the form, and I'm just going to select the ID, name, and age columns from the FB demo table. And then I'm going to have RackForms build a basic template for me so that those columns are displayed on the page. If you've never seen Builder before, a super powerful tool, allows us to essentially pluck values out of a database as we have right here, sort of like a table, and then just show them to our users. So I'm going to run this. You'll notice now that that's what it's done. It's gone out and it's pulled those values. So what we want to do is I want to have this form, as we have right here, so that I can click a link to go to the detail record, which will be this page right here for any one of these records. So to do that, I'm actually going to modify the template. I'm going to add a column after this current one, and I'm going to say, let's just say update. And then I'm going to click in this little blank spot. And by the way, let me just show you what the template looks like right now. It's just added a new column, so update, it's blank. Let's go ahead and populate that column. And the thing I'm going to populate it with is under Builder Tokens. I'm going to select from one of these tokens right here to actually create a link to my update page. So I'm going to use a token chooser to do that. And the thing I'm going to select is the ID column, and I'm going to create a link from it. So I'll put my cursor in there, and I'm going to click link. So what does this actually mean? Well, these are the columns I'm selecting from my database, so ID, name, and age. And you'll notice then that from this column, we have a bunch of types of what we call token add. So some of these are really advanced, like a function token. You could do things like grab the value from the database and make every letter uppercase, perform a calculation. We have update fields, a bunch of different things in here, displaying images. But the one that we care about is this link guy right here. This link is basically going to create a link to a page. And as a key, it's going to use the column in the database that I just selected. So I chose the ID field as the thing I'm going to create a link off of. So you'll recall when I was on the form right here that in order to show, let me actually go down. Oh, actually, we'll talk about this at the very end here. I have to make sure this is an application. But as you may recall here, that to pre-populate these fields, I had to put in an ID value. By the way, these are pre-populating because I need to submit the value. So let me just go ahead and pull this back out. So basically, I need to pull out these values. And we're just going to create this fresh right here. But I need to supply a query string. So I need to say question mark ID equals some value. And the some value that I want is the ID column from the database right here. So if I want this record, I need ID 302. If I want Steve Smith's record, I need ID 303. You'll notice if I say 303, I'm going to get Steve Smith's record in here. So that's what the builder page is going to allow us to do. With this update token, it actually is going to create a bunch of links. And you'll notice on the lower left-hand side of the screen right here, as I mouse over these, it's ID equals 302, 303, 312, right? These are all the IDs from the database right here. And now, so long as it's going to go to the right page, you'll notice that it's going to go to detail.php. As long as this page right here is called detail.php, which it is now, this will just take us to the page where we display the record for that user. So I selected 342, so I'm showing that record. If I go back and select my record again, it's showing my value right here. And so now we've created essentially an application. I've created a form that I can select Steve Smith's record, I can change Steve's age, I could submit this, I go to my submission page, and then if I go back to this first page of the builder form, we'll see that Steve Smith's age has been updated. Now there's one last little trick to this, of course, which is, again, we use this term application here. A form to me is when you're just, load a page, add some data, click submit, and it submits through. And that's sort of the workflow. That's usually what your end users see, that, sort of anonymous users filling in data. But for what we're building here is an application because we're now adding parts to complete more advanced logic, and we're linking parts of the application to other parts of the application. And so a good use of that is on our submission page right here, at the very bottom, to add a redirect. And the redirect is actually going to go to this builder page right here. So I'm going to rename this guy index.php. So how about when we hit this update page right here, we just go back to index.php. So now let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to load my form page. I'll select Steve Smith's record. Oops, 99, that's way too old. So let's change his age back to 21. And now when I hit submit, what's going to happen is instead of just stopping at the submission page, we're actually going to run our logic, but then we're going to redirect back to our builder page. So that's what happens here. So now we have this beautiful little flow of select a record, update it, submit, redirect back to our detail page right here. And so now we've built an application. And it's very flexible because this page right here can have many, many different fields, right? You can have 50 fields on here. This could be a multi-page form. This page will now hold all of the fields that you want to update. And that's critical because, to be absolutely clear, a builder page like this guy right here can absolutely also update your fields. So we could build, using a single click, a version of this page right here that instead of just displaying these values would actually add input fields where you could type new values and click update. And we can absolutely do that. There's nothing stopping us from doing that. The problem is a builder page, while it can update values, isn't really meant to update values that need to have things like validation or additional logic applied. And so you can think of this as a spreadsheet, but same as you can go into a spreadsheet in, like, let's say Excel, and make a bunch of really bad updates by changing the data types of fields, or adding an age where an email is supposed to be, right? Like kind of not actually making sure that your data updates are correct. That's the same, sort of general challenge with a builder page using it for updates. It's very handy in some cases, But in many cases, what you really want to do is select a record and go back to a standard form page. It allows us to update values and then go back to our original spreadsheet page. So that is how we build these types of forms in RackForms.